Hello and welcome to Secrets Mystery Manor. I'm your host, Psychic Zelda Kelly. Warning: this podcast may contain sensitive material. It is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer and listening discretion is advised. Hello and welcome. I am your host, Zelda Kelly, and today we have another exciting podcast with another one of our wonderful October Halloween friends, and his name is Frankenstein. Now, there is a deep, dark backstory to Frankenstein, so please heed the warning that we listed before, and that is this is intended for mature audiences and listeners simply because there is a lot of little moving parts yet. May be unsavory to younger ears. Okay, so thank you for giving me that license to move forward. This story is now 203 years old. Doesn't seem like that. Doesn't seem like that tested this time. 203 years old. A lot has happened in 203 years, hasn't it? We've had several wars. We've been through a technology boom, and yet this story has transcended time. We all like Frankenstein because we feel that Frankenstein is that creature that he's all powerful. He's strength, and it's just his mere presence is just so wonderfully overwhelming. But there's a backstory to this man, Frankenstein. I'm going to call him a man. Yeah, let's do that. We're going to call him a man. So in 1818, there was a young woman by the name of Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin Shelley. That is a mouthful. Mary Shelley. And as I sit here in the manor, the Secrets Mystery Manor, the room is dimly lit. We have candles around, a nice rocking chair. I'm sitting in a very nice tufted leather chair by the fireplace, and I want to share this with you. So sit back, grab a couple of snacks, and grab your blanket, because you're about to hear a story that many people don't know. I was really amazed when I started researching this story, and it took me a little while, and my apologies if this gets uploaded a little late, because I didn't want to miss anything that really would be of importance or that you would love about this story. I was intrigued by the background and how this story formed. As a young woman myself, I always heard that Mary Shelley was on a train from wherever she left for a destination of London, and while on the train, she wrote the story Frankenstein. I don't know how I heard that. I was school-aged. I don't know. I always loved to read. I was a literary student in school. So I don't know really where that mindset came from, but I was a little shocked that all these years I had thought that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein on a train, and I could not be further from the truth. So this young lady, Mary Godwin Shelley, was 18 years old when she first started writing Frankenstein. But 2 years previous to that, she was an unmarried mother, pregnant, actually, gave birth, and her family, her father was well, beyond poor. They were dirt poor. And Mary's mother died right after childbirth. 11 days old. Mary was 11 days old when her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, died from childbirth. So Mary grew up without a mother and with a father who was a poet and did not work because he wanted to sell his poetry. Okay, so for whatever reason, unfortunately, that's what happened. So Mary gave birth to this little baby and said that she had fallen ill. She herself, Mary, had fallen ill and said that the baby cried night after night. And one night she woke up to feed the baby and she felt it was sound asleep. And they were laying by the fire. And so she wanted to leave the baby sleep. And when she woke up in the morning, she found out that the baby did, in fact, pass away. That really, really bothered her. So she had a dream the next night that she fell asleep and the little baby came to life again. And it had just only been cold, and she put the baby by the fire and rubbed the baby warm, and she found out by awakening that that was not true. There was no baby, no more. Well, unfortunately, Mary was pregnant again only a few weeks later, and she really started just a new life as a mother when she started writing Frankenstein again. And then as she was pregnant again with her third, by the time she was finished with the book, she didn't put her name on the book. And she published it anonymously in 1818 because she was very concerned about losing the custody of your children. That's what a graphic novel for this time was. This was pretty horrendous back then. And she wrote it very graphically. Amazing. It seems like it came out of a lot of pain, if you ask me, and I think you're probably thinking the same thing. Interesting thing is, she wrote the book anonymously, and she didn't give the monster a name either. So this name, when we see Frankenstein, we see the monster. We see him, this green monster that he's sewn together, and he kind of has a flat head, and he's got bolts coming out of his neck, and he's got these big feet, and he's this huge creature that has been sewn together in life. But he remained nameless. He did not have a name. Frankenstein was the name of the mad scientist, Victor Frankenstein, that actually created this monster. Now, in the movies, in the books, we sort of kind of know that, right? I mean, okay, we know that. But I think at this point, it's very important to say that the monster remains nameless throughout the whole story. He is an anonymous figure. Like, he's there, but he doesn't really count. He doesn't really show up. But interestingly enough, in London in 1823, there was a theatrical version of Frankenstein that was on the stage. Now, by this time, Mary Shelley had given birth to 4 children. She buried 3, and she lost another unnamed baby to a miscarriage. And it was so severe, that miscarriage was so very severe, that she literally had to sit on ice to stop her bleeding. So in the playbill, I just wanted to, because this is how tragic this poor woman's life was, living in just the ultimate poorest of conditions. And she writes this really fantastic novel. Now, at the day, there was a lot of divide. In 1818, when she started this, she didn't tell anyone what she was working on because she knew it was that groundbreaking, but also that controversial. So in 1823, when it did go to London and was on the stage, the monster was listed on the playbill as quotes and then a blank, almost like hyphened blank, so like a blank between quotes. That's how the monster was listed, because he had no name. So they basically said, Mary Shelley said that he was unnameable, and that she felt that not having a name was actually very good about the creature in the theatrical billing. And she herself did not name the creature, and she did not know even really how to start. So what she did was give this scientist, Victor Frankenstein, this name, pardon me, who was able to assemble all of these parts. And for her, these parts basically were a collection of the people that she loved and had lost in her life. So they represented people that she loved so much. She loved her own mother so much and only knew her the first 11 days of her life. And it said that she would go and sit in the cemetery by her mother's grave and read and write in her diary and walk and read and write again and continue to write Frankenstein over and over as the time passed until she finished it and it was actually published. She actually met this fellow by the name of Percy Shelley, who became her husband. But before we get to that point, I wanted to make the point of how all of these people grafted into this monster, into this creature. William Godwin was her father, and he was this poet who was very well renowned and very well sought after and very philosophical and very romantic and very broke. He didn't have a dime, but he lectured all over London, but felt that it was more important for him to teach than to accept money. So they lived on nothing. They squallered. Okay? They lived on nothing. He had kind of a different sense of creativity, so she grafted him into the monster. Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary Shelley's mother, was a feminist and met William Godwin, their father and mother, in 1791 at a political reading of a book by Thomas Paine. And they met and fell in love and got married. And so those two were grafted into the creature. So along comes another young man, and this is the man that Mary was married to, Percy Shelley. Now, Percy was kind of the sum in what Mary Shelley had said later on in her diaries. Percy was the sum of everything that her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, and her father, William Godwin, were. So she felt he was the best of those both worlds. However, when she met Percy, he was married and had a child, and his wife was pregnant. When they met, Mary was only 15 years old. So they would run off and have this romantic, illicit affair. And all the time, Percy would be coming to their home and actually seeking the guidance from the poet, Mary's father, William Godwin, for his own poetry, for his own writings. And yet, well, he had a double standard there. He came over to see the father, but then he would also run off with Mary. And then later on, of course, William, Daddy Godwin, found out about all this and really told Percy, "You've ruined my daughter." And see, back then, during that time frame, during that century and coming into the 19th century, the 18th and 19th century, coming into that era, any woman who would go out and stay with a man who would have an affair, certainly sleep with him, and especially get pregnant with out of wedlock, and especially if he is married to another young lady who is also expecting a child, would be considered ruined. So if you ran off with a man during that time, or you did not have a chaperone, or you decided you wanted to, well, just meet him on your own, it was very unacceptable during that time. And if you were quote unquote ruined, no other man would come around you. And your hopes of marrying another man would be nil and next to none. So at the age of 15, going on 16, Mary became pregnant with Percy's child. Now, that was the child in the beginning of our story that Mary lost. And that's when this mindset of writing about Frankenstein, because actually Mary Shelley was an extremely vivid, colorful, literary wonder. She could write, and it was just so eloquent. She could paint the picture of what she wanted you to see in your mind. And after all, that's the idea of an excellent author, is to write so wonderful, so curating, that you paint the picture of what you're describing in the person's mind who is reading it. You transform that person, the reader, to that time and place, and in that particular moment that you're describing on paper, you tap the imagination and the intellect of the reader to the point where they get lost in the story. And that's what she did with the book, the modern Prometheus and Frankenstein. Now, I want to take a side trip here and tell you that when this book started out as the modern Prometheus instead of Frankenstein, well, the definition of Prometheus is a mythological Greek character that was a titan and who was a god of fire, and he would create humanity. He would create a human out of clay, and by fire, that human would live. It's very interesting, isn't it? So see, she had a lot of literary experience, and I'm sure it was from listening and working with her father, because they had a little library, sort of, kinda, in their home, and that's how Percy found them. And her father would sit there and write all day, and they would read the classics constantly, all the time. So Mary grew up reading and writing, and who knew the classics and the authors. So this was no stranger to her. So she collectively took from each one of these stories and of her own pain, and then started writing the modern Prometheus, or Frankenstein as we know it now. So the funny thing here now, as we go on, is that down the road, Percy wanted to divorce his wife. Well, it was unheard of. So she had the child and committed suicide. Now, this is tragedy after tragedy. Hello? I mean, think about this. You weren't bargaining for this today, I'm sure. However, this story really deserves to be told. So, as time went on, Mary Shelley continued to write, and her book was an absolute instant hit. And as time went on, she decided to start writing more, and she never had the success that she did with the book of Frankenstein. So as time went on, she decided that she was going to marry another man, and that Percy would live with her. She was going to run off, and her stepsister, because her father had gotten remarried, so she had a stepsister, decided to run off with Percy and Shelley as well. So now not only is Shelley ruined, but her sister, who was Claremont, her stepsister. Now, Claremont got pregnant by Lord Byron, and he was very wealthy. So they all lived in this very, very nice home, and they lived off of Lord Byron. They took advantage of this. Hello, friends. It's time for me to take a little break and tell you about Psychic Secrets. That's www.psychicssecrets.com. There, you can book an advisor. You can talk with an advisor, chat with an advisor, have a video call with an advisor. You can read the blog on many, many different great subjects. There's a lot of learning there. And of course, if you slide on over to the right and you see the More tab and you scroll down, you'll see where it says podcast. Come on in and enjoy our previous podcasts, other than today. And if you're feeling a little abnormal, we'll help you sew things together so you have a better direction and a better light on the subject. We'd love to see you there. So come on over. We have a special of $1 per minute, up to 30 minutes for a first-time caller. Now, hold the horses here. Wow, that is astounding. That's wonderful. And that's exciting because we can accomplish a lot in 30 minutes. So you can book an appointment with me. I'm extension number 11, and we have some other really, really great advisors as well. So come on over, stop at www.psychicssecrets.com. Don't be lost. Be brave. Step on into. Don't feel like you have to be full of questions when you've got the answers right in front of you. Can't wait to see you. You be well. Thanks again for letting me take this little break. Now, back to the podcast. So now, while living in this mansion of Lord Byron's, the stepsister, Ada Clare, became pregnant with Lord Byron's child. Now, of course, that was totally unacceptable. So they hid this young lady out, Ada Clare Claremont, and they decided to say that the child was once again Percy and Shelley's child. Now, that was a scandalous thing because really nobody believed that story, and rightfully so. But then Lord Byron became extremely upset and decided that he was going to take the child and put the child in a home because he said, he wrote later on that the Shelleys had never really were able to rear any children because they had lost so many of their own. Now that's a little on the cruel side, isn't it? I mean, my goodness, look at the drama. This is like a soap opera here, isn't it? And so we think now today we have a lot of we have a lot of drama and trauma in families and toxic relationships. Oh, let's just go back to this time. This spawned the creation of Frankenstein. In the meantime, Mary Godwin was writing this ghost story. It never really went anywhere. She tried to replicate the sensation of Frankenstein, which it was a sensation. Sir Walter Scott, and we have a little story about Sir Walter Scott coming up in a podcast down the road. We'll remember him from this podcast. Also remarked on Mary Shelley's book, but it seemed as a real turnoff. These literary authors, these classic writers, did not like at all what she had written. Isn't that funny? It's probably a wonder if it were jealousy, because after all, Mary really was an unknown and a young woman, and writing of something so graphic, and we'll get into that in a minute. So later on down the years, and we're gonna now tie up this story of Mary Shelley. Now that you know the background and the pain and the hurt of everything of Mary, at the end of her life, she said that she was the last relic of a beloved race, my companions extinct before me. Everyone died around her. Well, and her half-sister, Fanny, took her own life in 1816. Percy Shelley, her husband, finally, after they had gotten married, drowned in 1822, so they weren't married too long. Lord Byron fell ill and died in Greece in 1824, and all of this left Mary Shelley alone. Now, the sister, Claire, she had died earlier. So this was like really traumatic for poor Mary. She had been surrounded by death. I mean, you may as well say since she was 11 years old. She was familiar. Death was her constant companion. Frightening, isn't it? So, it took her 8 years to write Frankenstein. And when she was 28, she published the book The Last Man. It was set in the 21st century, and when only one man endures, the lone survivor of a terrible plague, having failed for all of his imagination, for all his knowledge, to save the life of a single person. So she wrote pretty, I'm going to say, sad and down and dreary stories. Poor Mary. But now let's talk about Frankenstein and what Mary wrote. So Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, was the brainchild of this creature, of this monster. Well, this monster was the brainchild, rather, of Victor Frankenstein. Both created the other. Now, isn't that something? Think about that. Victor Frankenstein had this idea. He was a scientist. He became mad and obsessed with usurping God, of having the power to create. Oh, that's a big thing. Nowadays, I guess it's called cloning. Think about that. All right, so we won't go there. But let's back up to Frankenstein. So Victor Frankenstein, this scientist, had an assistant by the name of Fritz. Fritz wasn't too on the ball, but he did whatever Victor Frankenstein told him to. So one of the professors of Victor Frankenstein, his name was Dr. Waldman. Now, Dr. Waldman was teaching a class on the human brain. And the human brain was in the classroom, and it was Fritz's job to steal that brain. Well, in the middle of stealing it, Fritz damaged the brain. Now, I know you're thinking of that classic movie, Young Frankenstein, where he says that he got the brain from Abby Normal. We all love that one. That was a great movie. That's one of my favorites. Young Frankenstein is literally it's brilliant. And okay, so we won't go there. But anyway, we should probably. Putting on the Ritz. That's right. So back to this. So he delivers this brain, now that is damaged, to Victor Frankenstein. So Victor Frankenstein keeps this brain intact, so as it is, doesn't know that it is damaged, but the brain came from a serial killer. So the next task for Fritz was to get body parts. So he was to get these body parts. He was to get these limbs. I mean, everything. Think about it. Head, torso, you name it. Legs, feet, arms, hands. Let your imagination go. He had to get it. So he did. They dug up freshly buried corpses of men, and Fritz would take them back to the laboratory for Victor. Now, Victor was engaged to a young lady by the name of Elizabeth, who loved him dearly, but thought something was very upsetting. So she goes to Dr. Waldman, and she tells Dr. Waldman, can't even talk, Dr. Waldman, paging Dr. Waldman. Okay, so she goes to Dr. Waldman and says, something is wrong with Victor. He's acting really amiss. He's acting like he's out of character. There's something wrong here. Hello? Dr. Waldman agrees. And they start trying to get closer to him. But in the meantime, Victor is putting together this creature. Now, I'm going to skip over a few parts because for those of you who haven't really seen Frankenstein the movie or read Frankenstein the novel, I'm not going to give you some spoilers on it, but I will tell you a few little things, and it will make you think of Mary, of how the creature, after he is brought to life, doesn't understand. He wakes up one day, he doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't understand what has happened, who he is, where he is. And he tells Victor Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, that he doesn't have a name. And that he doesn't know if he would ever have one. You start feeling sorry for Frankie at this point. I'm going to call the creature Frankie because actually it's Frank Jr., right? Okay, so no, I won't. But anyway, you start feeling bad for this person, well, this creature in a human body that knows enough to know that he doesn't know enough. He doesn't know why he's existing. And he painfully cries to Dr. Frankenstein, where am I? Who am I? What is my purpose here on earth? I am a product of death and dying. What am I here for? When I saw that part, when I read that part, in Frankenstein novel that immediately made me think of Mary. She was really transporting her feelings into this unnamed creature because she just couldn't understand why she was dealt the lot in life. And by taking up with Percy Shelley, she thought she would be bettering herself. And of course, they went on with Lord Byron, and unfortunately, that didn't turn out so well either. So, in the end, this misguided, misunderstood creature makes a false move, and people think that he's there to harm. And he wasn't really intended to do that at first, but out of hurt and anguish and torment and toxicity, he starts turning, and he becomes angry and deadly, and people start dying at his hand. In the end, we know what happens to the creature and to Dr. Frankenstein. If you don't know, oh, well, it's this time of year. I'm sure you can catch the movie, you can catch the book, and you can read. I'm not going to spoil alert it for everybody. But now I want to talk about how Frankenstein, this story, has transcended the ages. So in 1931, Universal, why does Universal always seem like they are groundbreaking in these things, huh? I mean, they did. They were groundbreaking. They had some minds back then together that really liked this sort of thing. So I'm glad they did. I mean, after all, it's entertainment for us, right? It has lived through the ages. So in 1931, the Story of Frankenstein was released, and it lost $2.2 million at the box office. Now, I want you to know, $2.2 million is a lot of money nowadays, but in 1931, oh my goodness, that was a fortune. But here's the saving grace. It came out on the heels of Dracula with Bela Lugosi. We haven't talked about him yet. We have one more podcast to go. He may be, could he possibly be our next subject for a podcast? Tune in next Saturday. We'll find out, right? So anyway, Dracula made $700,000 in profit the first night it was released at the box office. Now, these releases were in New York, right? So what better place to have these was the entertainment town of entertainment. So then everyone started getting the idea that they became monster hungry, like we are today. We love all this stuff, don't we? I mean, my goodness. We went from mummies and Wolfman, Dracula, and Frankenstein, and now, my gosh, we have every sick and disordered monster out there, and we just can't get enough of this, can we? And let's add some aliens into the mix too. So now we have these two movies that Universal put out, and now Frankenstein started making a profit. And boy, they really came out with some marketing. I mean, and I'm going to post the posters there, the lobby cards and the theater posters. You know him, Boris Karloff. He was Frankenstein, and oh, he was a good one too. He was very, very good. But now Frankenstein started becoming popular, and Universal saw it. So then it was Son of Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Frankenstein meets Dracula, Frankenstein meets the werewolf, Frankenstein meets this one, that one, and even Frankenstein meets Abbott and Costello. That was hilarious. So there's all kinds of Frankenstein movies and spin-offs because we, as the public, as these type of people that we are, love this sort of thing, and we just cannot get enough. So even now, In later years, well, of course, we already mentioned Young Frankenstein, right? I love that. And Frau Blucher. Remember that one? And so, you know, the great thing is, with all of these entertainment, we have not lost the original story of this unnamed creature, the modern Prometheus, the Victor Frankenstein's monster, pieced together, crafted together, representing so many people in the lives of Mary Shelley. Certainly, she could never have given as much justice as she did by writing this story on a train to London. Oh, no, 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 contraire. She had to create from her own pain. And from that, we have Frankenstein. She probably would have been amazed and very wealthy if she would have lived through the ages. Of course, she didn't. She died a young lady. But this was really something, and I encourage you to also go through this time and read 1818. And I want you to do a little research about that time period and how when you were poor in London, baby, you were poor, very poor. So I guess it goes to show you that sometimes we can turn pain into something more. And even though it represents something that our pain, we can turn that around. Look at how many people have enjoyed those films. And of course, Hammer Studios in the UK, my goodness, there were a lot of Frankenstein, this, that, and the other thing coming out of there too. So the next time you see Young Frankenstein, or you hear the name Frankenstein, I hope you think of Mary Shelley and the pain that she endured to bring this to us. Comment below, please, and let me know how you feel about this story. And now, has this changed your outlook on watching Frankenstein or reading about Frankenstein? All we know is that this represents a lot more than a creature. So I want to thank you for coming over to my manor, to the Mystery Manor. I can't even talk, the Secrets Mystery Manor. I want to thank Psychic's Secrets. And I also want to invite you over to my House of Zelda Facebook page, where we have a lot of fun over there. So stay tuned. Come back next Saturday for another wonderful episode of Secrets Mystery Manor. I am your host, once again, Zelda Kelly. You be well, be brave, be blessed, and I'll talk with you very soon. Bye for now. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. I just love this, don't you?